We recently told you about a venture capitalist purchasing commercial properties in San Francisco on Fillmore Street in Pacific Heights.
But on the other side of town, in the Inner Sunset neighborhood, we found a landlord keeping leases low and in some cases reducing rents.
ABC 7 News reporter Leanne Melendez joining us live now in studio with a look at the impact. What a contrast, right?
Right, and it has a huge impact because the last thing you want to have are empty storefronts because the neighborhood just goes, you know, it's terrible for the neighborhoods. I like how one local newspaper described the current situation with some commercial landlords. Quote, stubborn landlords are still basing their prices on a reality that doesn't exist. But there are many other landlords in San Francisco who say it doesn't serve them both financially or morally to raise rents and evict small businesses. The old Rexall drugstore on 9th and Irving is a symbol of permanence in a forever changing city.
I think they all disappeared like 50 years ago.
Yet this one remains. Businesses here in the Inner Sunset District like to stay put. That's if their landlord offers them stability by keeping rents reasonable.
My rent hasn't been raised since the pandemic.
His landlord lives in the neighborhood, and that makes a difference.
The people who are in the area, they keep their rents low enough that business can grow and survive. And people who are using this as investments with trusts and funds are seeing, pre-pandemic numbers that they want to have, but they're not getting anyone to be able to afford those rents.
Like this building in the neighborhood, which was previously leased to T-Mobile. The owner is asking $15,000 a month. No takers yet, even though San Francisco is trying to force landlords to fill storefront spaces within 6 months or pay a hefty new tax. And how's that going? According to the Office of the Treasurer, 2,772 parcels in San Francisco are subject to the tax. And in the past 2 years, the city has been able to collect $3 million. Yet on this block of Irving Street, there are no empty businesses. This real estate agency has been here for 5 years. Mana, a Korean restaurant, 14 years. This hair salon, 21 years. And the Rexall drugstore was just leased a week ago, after the landlord agreed to significantly lower the rent.
Let me do what I have, okay?
Iqbal Jill is the new owner and pharmacist.
I always wanted to have my own. Been trying since 1995, but again didn't have much money to start my own because you need money to survive for at least a year or so.
We caught up with his landlord, Adib Dudam, who owns 14 properties. Every one of them, he says, is rented.
I never had an empty store in the last 10 years. This is how I negotiate leases with the old tenants. Make yourself happy, give me a number, and if you're happy, I'm happy.
Having owned for so long, his tax base is also relatively low, so he has some wiggle room. But he understands that for a new tenant, starting a business could take months, sometimes more than a year. According to an August 2024 report issued by Spur, a new restaurant must go through 61 steps involving 11 local agencies to get its required permits and licenses. Just to get started, a restaurant may have to pay 17 different government fees, making it both a difficult and expensive process.
If you go into a small store and you see like a liquor store or a grocery store, you will see maybe 15 to 20 permits just to operate.
Dudam lived in the Inner Sunset for 50 years. He understands that small business owners are subject to unpredictable circumstances, the highs and lows of the market. For example, shortly after the pandemic, UCSF's Parnassus campus began a massive renovation.
So a lot of their lunchtime staff and researchers are out in Mission Bay, and no longer in the Inner Sunset. We're not seeing the tourists like we ever were before. We used to have a lot of walk-through and footfall coming in from around the world and people visiting for the very first time. We're not seeing that.
Dudam is not his landlord, but many others in the Inner Sunset are following Dudam's lead.
We try to keep them happy, keep them floating by not raising the rent.
It appears that landlords who live in the neighborhood often understand the problems better and are more empathetic towards their tenants. Now, the only empty spaces we saw in that neighborhood were once occupied by franchises. And I think there are a lot of landlords who think, I'll wait a little bit longer, and we're going to get the money that we used to see before the pandemic.